All right, so our last set of notes that we're going to take before our test will be over 12.3 British imperialism in India. And one of the things I pointed out on Monday was that India used to be a lot larger than what it is today. So this map up here in the corner is showing you how large India was, British India. And then the one down here is showing that breakup, the partition of China, of India that's going to happen a little later. Excuse me. So when we first look at India, we are looking at it through an indirect control, and we're looking at it from the East India Company, which would have had to have received permission from the British government, a charter, and they would have to pretty much finance going over and having their own army. But the British East India Company is overseeing India for Great Britain. So England is still involved. And having their own army, I mean, it will be led by the British officers, but they are going to bring in local soldiers, the sepoys, to actually staff their military. I'd mentioned in class on Monday that England sees India as the jewel in the crown. So this is one of their most valuable colonies. And as we've seen so far, Great Britain does anything and everything to protect it. Just like all of the other colonies, they are going in for the raw materials for British manufacturing, and they're going to force the people to produce these goods. And they're also going to be required to only buy British goods. So just like all the other places that we've seen the colonial powers go into, they are exploiting their economy and they are hurting local businesses. We also will see the bringing in of technology, railroads. And when we were looking at those motives for imperialism cards, the one with the Lipton tea, and it was the British, we saw that they had factories, they had trains, they had construction, resources in order to create the goods and export the goods. So we definitely are seeing the bringing in of technology. So railroads is going to be able to move cash crops, and we know cash crops are never good for the people locally because it's going to lead to food shortages and famine. For the imperialist nation, they're great because they're going to be able to make a profit. Railroads, just like they were in England when we first started to see railroads, will be able to transport goods at a faster rate. And when we look at China on Friday, we're also going to see that there's a specific crops that are going to come out of India that will be tied to international events. And that particularly, that crop will be poppies, because they're going to end up using poppies, and I'm talking about flowers and poppy seeds, to actually make opium. And they're going to use opium as a way to get into China and control trade. So when we look at the impact of colonialism, nothing here should be a surprise because it's the same thing that we've seen throughout all of the other case studies. You have a country that has come in and is holding the political and economic power. It's just, since we're looking at India, it is just going to be England, because we know through the 7 Years' War and the French and Indian War that there was another leg to those wars, and that was in India, and that was back and forth between the British and the French, and the British ended up winning. So we are looking strictly here at British control over India. We know that cash crops is going to result in the loss of self-sufficiency and famine, because we are not going to produce crops to help take care of our people. They're producing crops to actually sell, export abroad, and their focus is not to take care of the local people. And since they've disrupted even the local industry, then the people aren't able to recover themselves. Indian life will be disrupted by missionaries and racist attitudes. So we are going to see social Darwinism and religion come into play in India, as it has played out in all of the other colonies. British modernized India's economy, when we start to see, just as we saw with everything else, We will see modernization. We will see changes to public health. We will see education systems being adopted like the Western ways, but it is always at, sometimes the expense of what was already established within these lands. So we're not going to see a group of people just sit back and say, yep, you can take us over and do whatever you want. We are going to see people rise up and resist and rebel. One particular rebellion is the Sepoy Mutiny. And rumor had it that the British were actually using animal fat to wrap around the cartridges that the sepoys needed to use in order to put in their rifles. Well, they were using, the rumor had, this fat that was being used to wrap around it was not only from pigs, but also cows. So you had pork and you had beef. And for religious reasons, whether your sepoy soldiers were either Hindu or they were Muslim, they could not put that animal fat into their mouths. And that was how they actually had to break the cartridges in order to be able to use them in their rifles. So the whole idea that you have, people that you're employing in your military and you're completely disregarding religious restrictions where they do not, eat certain animals, and you're using the fat from these animals to wrap the cartridges and they have to stick it in their mouth. Complete and total disrespect and disregard to the people. Well, whether it was a rumor or not, it was something that was very believable because of social Darwinism. Because remember, under social Darwinism, these Western powers are coming in and they're looking at the culture that was already established and their customs, and they're saying, well, it doesn't match mine, so yours is wrong. So it wouldn't be a surprise that they would go in and not respect the Hindu religion or the Muslim religion and dietary restrictions. And dietary restrictions isn't something that is just exclusive to what was going on in India. You see a lot of religions that have dietary restrictions. It was just in this particular incident, they're seeing that the British weren't exactly being understanding about that. And the people did rise up, they did rebel. The ones that did were jailed. And then it also led to, more and more people joining in. But then you also have a group that remained loyal to the British. Because one thing you have to keep in mind, and we saw this within Africa, that when your group gets elevated above another, it's also protecting your family, it's protecting your holdings. So you are going to have people who will remain loyal to the British, but on the other hand, not seeing that they're actually using you to keep everyone else in line. This became a turning point because now, instead of having an indirect control and allowing the British East India Company to oversee India, then the British government is going to take direct control over India. And they're going to remain in control over India until we get to the end of World War II. World War II ends in 1945, and then we will start to see the partition of India and the establishment of different countries with India once British rule ends. And we'll look at that more later in fourth quarter. But unfortunately, what the British are going to run into for themselves is an uprising of increase in distrust between them and the native people of India, which we see that playing out time and time again in all of the colonies that we've looked at this unit. There will be nationalist reforms or a rise of nationalism in India. And you're going to see this cross the board in a lot of different places, not only in India, because people are seeing that their culture, their customs are being attacked. Now, for Raja Ram Mohan Roy, he is seeing that we need to embrace this modernization. We need to maybe just adopt the Western ways and establish these reforms to move us along. And we're going to see that in Japan as well, that, we might need to adopt in order not to be completely taken over, not to be destroyed by this Western power. And not everyone's going to agree to that because they are seeing themselves being treated as second class citizens in their own home, in their own country. And they want to challenge that and they want to question that. We saw from the very beginning in our pre colonial presentations that India was an established country. It was a culture. They had, economic prosperity, they had political, they had a wide range of things. And now, because of their location, because of the resources, now they're under the control of an outside power. And so we are going to see that rise of nationalistic spirit where some are going to say, let's figure out how to adopt and use that to our advantage. And others are going to say, no, we need to challenge. We will start to see nationalist groups form like the Indian National Congress, which will represent the Hindus, and then the Muslim League. Now, the Hindus and the Muslims aren't always getting along in India, but one thing they do have in common is they don't like the rule of the British. So, having that common enemy, we will see them being able to work together for a little bit of time. But when we start to get to the partitioning stage, then things are going to come under question. Now, we'll look more into that after World War I and World War II, because as I said on Monday, we're going to spend more time with the Ottoman Empire and the Muslim lands and India once we get through those wars, because a lot of things that happened during those wars are going to impact this region and what's going to happen to them after. I included this quote from Nehru, who was the first prime minister of India. This process continued throughout the 19th century. Other old Indian industries, shipbuilding, metalwork, glass, paper, and many crafts were broken up. Thus, the economic development of India was stopped, and the growth of new industry was prevented. A typical colonial economy was built up. India became an agricultural colony of industrial England. It supplied raw materials and provided markets for England's industrial goods. The destruction of industry led to unemployment on a vast scale. The poverty of the country grew. The standard of living fell to terribly low levels. So here we have India's first prime minister pointing out pretty much the downfall of what imperialism did to India. And we could replace this with any of those countries that we've looked at, that their economic development stopped, that old industries shut down, and that everything that's being produced within these countries, within these now colonies, is strictly for the industrial growth of that Western power, of that European nation, or of the United States in the areas that they're going into. And we'll definitely see these areas where the standard of living is falling. Now, what we will also see when we look at indirect and direct control, how much education is being provided. Because one of the things, that whole idea of let's embrace this modernization, let's utilize maybe what, they're offering and see how we can develop it to enhance us. Providing that education, opening the doors for the native indigenous people to be educated in your country, learn your laws, learn your rules, and then use it to apply to help their nation. We're going to see that happening when we get out of World War I and World War II. I included this visual just so you can see some of the effects of the British control. Not only looking here at agriculture, where you're replacing food crops with cash crops. And look at the deaths. From 1820 to 1890, how much you have here in this growth and millions of people dying because of that focus of cash crops. Because remember, cash crops will not be used to feed the people in that land. And then bringing in of railroads. So seeing the transition of bringing the British railroads into India and what that growth would be within that country. The next thing I'd like for you to do is go ahead and flip through, double check your answers with my answer key. So here are the answers to questions 1, 2, and 3. And then here's 4 and 5. And then 6 and 7. One thing I wanted to point out with number 7, and this is one where students tend to struggle with. So looking at how did the British, what was the British influence on Indian culture? Not what they were hoping it was going to be. Because remember, under colonialism, through imperialism, they're hoping the people will adopt their ways and to assimilate. But what we have here is Indian writers are going to use literature to establish a national identity and to explore issues raised by that relationship between India and Great Britain. It does the reverse in some cases because now the people are trying to preserve their heritage, preserve their culture. And we know from the time of the Enlightenment, scientific revolution and Enlightenment, that literature, that your written work can get these ideas out there. It can preserve your heritage. It can challenge the norm. It can challenge society and continue to try to create this new national identity and explore what's going on. Romanticism did the exact same thing through those revolutions, getting people to say, let's preserve our folklore, let's preserve our heritage. And that's what we're seeing happening here in India. And you're going to see it happening in a lot of other places as well. All right, so double check your answers. And you can either work on your extra credit crossword puzzle now if you choose to do the crossword puzzle. If you can't find it, you want to look in last week's absent folder, in the third quarter folder, because that's where I uploaded since you guys received it last week. And you want to start studying. On Wednesday, we're going to play Kahoot. And if you don't have a snow day on Thursday, then your test is going to be that day. You guys have a good one.